So hello everyone. So my little voice AI thing subscription is kind of done. I have to wait like next month to use it again, so later I guess.
Now, hovers don't receive additional damage when a projectile hits their side projection. Was this a thing? Since Crossout 2.0, the opposite face of attachment take 30% more damage. That's why I always tried to mount them backwards. Ha ha ha. New armor penetration, armor resistances, less explode modules. This sounds very nice. I take it that the new armor weight ratio makes Steppenwolf armor less viable, but I'm interested to see what kind of resistances they'll get, and always happy to see work on nerfing hovers and spaced armor. I'm a Steppenwolf part user myself, but if they have a generalized resistance buff to explosive and overall damage, I can welcome this change pretty well. Fire starters will probably have the best fire resistance in the game, as well as other unique resistances based on their faction combat style. Exactly. I get into heated exchanges with others using cannons, and honestly, I just want the fun to last longer for the both of us. Guess Thar makes two Steppenwolfs wanting to tank even harder. I welcome you, comrade. I take it that the new armor weight ratio makes Steppenwolf armor less viable, but I'm interested to see what kind of resistances they'll get. Opposite effect. It's a general buff to heavy armor, and as a result, hovers have tended to go the route of less PS in armor, more in weapons, as well as dropping in PS. This bites both ways because the competency of them is more variable now, and always happy to see work on nerfing hovers and spaced armor, because we all love health brick metas, /S from the POV of a turret cannon player. The last round of the test server felt like a massive step in the right direction, making them viable again while banishing pancakes back to the scrapyard they belong to. On paper, the added changes to armor are something the community wished for since time immemorial, but the combination of improved armor with the nerf to the cannon's explosive damage feels way overtuned. It managed to make them feel even worse than on the live server now. TLDR, cannons feels even weaker now, even though this was supposed to make them relevant again. They're just backtracking on shit they once promised and threw in a bunch of filler things to make it look better. Yup. Still waiting on the promised return of the energy point for heavies that was supposed to come with the probably scrapped torque update. I don't recall that as a promise as long as I've played, but I do know that I asked semi-recently about such. They said that they had no plans to and wanted to look at balancing them another way. Please don't give structure resistance based on faction. That's a real creativity killer. Agreed. A 6-14% resistance will often be barely enough to even notice compared to placebo effect. So it does very little for the average player, only really benefits players making min-max decisions to obtain any possible advantage, is bad for builds designed with aesthetic part choices, and makes balancing much more complicated by adding another factor to armor. I see no reason for faction-based armor resistances, and several reasons against. And it'll be a complicated-looking stat to scare off new players for no reason. Yeah, this also I like complexity, but 100% this min-maxer's gonna make it more ugly than spaced armor. Agreed. Terrible idea. 100% agree. Agreed. I don't see any appeal to faction damage resistances. Any vehicle that looks good will probably be a mix of random factions, and nobody will be aiming at specific pieces of armor mid-combat while remembering which factions are resistant to their current weapon. There's no reason to add this complication. If you want to make gameplay more interesting in some way, instead you can reintroduce wheel grip personalities, the ones removed here, https://crossout.net/en/news/642/curry_nt/. It was fun using wheels with different terrain advantages. While the grip mechanics need to be tuned up, having one wheel for every situation is by far the most retarded thing. Having one wheel for every situation is by far the most retarded thing. Instead, we have 3 wheels that are objectively better than everything else and a few other wheels that are somewhat situational. That's why I say traction needs a review, and don't fool yourself. The one and only wheel that high PS is using is Hermits, and only Hermits. Sabbaths are gaining popularity again, though, but by far the most used, whereas Hermit, for its completely unbalanced stats, tonnage and durability matching Bigfoot's with a smaller hitbox and a third of the mass, If you want to fix wheel, you need to make the other wheels appealing, or at least make those wheels less likely to be used for every single build. That's why I say traction needs a review, more like wheel balance as a whole. Wheels are horribly balanced currently. Traction's only a part of that. The one and only wheel that high PS is using is Hermit's, and only Hermit's. Hermit's don't let you tilt builds. They're great wheels, but Bigfoots are larger and give you more options on top of their perk. Yes, Bigfoots are great, but on current status of the game, they're used on less than 30% of the wheeled builds. I personally do prefer them, but their power consumption makes them too difficult to use effectively against faster or more maneuverable builds. Omni's got the love they deserved, and art builders are already screeching about how unbalanced they are. The game ain't ever going to be balanced as long as the loudest player base is also the least experienced. It has always been the same. When tractor wheels came out, they were meta, then small tracks, then hovers and mole legs, then big rams. Bigfoots came out more or less in the middle of all that mess, now omnis. Yet the art builders complain that their 500 durability 4-wheels car doesn't perform as well as the thoughtful, optimized builds on high PS, while rocking a legendary cabin or many modules that bloat their PS unnecessarily. Imagine if they weren't basement dwellers in real life. No, you can't make a process that takes 4 hours to now take one using robots and automation that's going to take our jobs. One. That doesn't change that you see far more of them even for general usage than, let's say, a buggy wheel build. That power drain is more than worth them using for, unless you're that desperate for power. My Gravstar build uses 2 Bigfoot for the perk, and for the tilting and as a 4-wheel build. In practice, at least, it has 2 claws, but they're usually just there for the perk. It works just fine. And I don't even officially count Omnis as wheels. They're legally under their own category of rolling based in the tech tree. The difference now is that there used to be some differences. You could beat someone in sand because their wheels couldn't handle sand as well as roads. Now it's a tonnage and size difference leading to clear winners and some situational uses for a few others. Tilt is good, but you're restricted to the very few builds that actually need it. Besides, you got big rams that are far better for the same power and even more tilt. And again, that's not effective. Only effective wheels right now, for most purposes, are Hermit's. Bigfoots were on that position back then, but Hermit's have replaced them completely. This is my point from the start. Bigrams do give you more tilt, but then you lose a bindable trigger. They're effective. It's not just Hermit's that are good. The perk and tilt alone make them part of the few wheels at the top. The only other one joining them is the claw, and it's obvious why it's there. Their general goodness just makes them stay there. Right now, the top spots for wheels are Hermit and Sabbath. Claw is situational, and Bigrams too. Bigfoots are lower tier than that. Well, maybe some tanks use Bigfoots, but tanks have transitioned into AML spiders since the buffs they got. I feel like they are changing the whole game, and I don't know if I should be scared. Lots of changes at once, which will change the game style of players. I enjoy playing cannons, and the reduction of blast, and the addition of damage resistance may be even worse than I expected. This may work out really good, or maybe a complete failure. So far, testing Mammoth's Mastodons, it feels like a nerf, especially since they didn't get any buff to their HP. IMO necessary, considering the stupid DPS that pinpoint weapons deal these days, disarming a cannon before it fires the second-third salvo. Asterisk sobs in increased spreadsheeting complexity. Asterisk. On the plus side, this definitely sounds like it'll give more meaningful choice when building. Not just Steppenwolfs for Dura PS, Lunatics for Dura Volume, on top of the obvious damage type considerations. On the negative, it'll be a lot more work to determine the best for a given situation, and I'm not so sure that it'll make the end results any less oppressive. Edit. Anyone have any insights into the Icarus changes? 5% speed loss for 38%. Tonnage seems like a huge buff, but IDK if 95-90 kph is significant for wheeled builds chasing them. On the negative, it'll be a lot more work to determine the best for a given situation, and I'm not so sure that it'll make the end results any less oppressive. Not really. The Steppenwolves get the best spread of resistances, 4% ballistic, 12% explosive, and 4% energy. Scavengers are next with 6% ballistic and 14% explosive. The rest are subpar when it comes to what you're really worried about when it comes to regularly incoming damage. Perhaps there are already multiply considerations for minimizing DPT or maximizing EHP. We can already see the ridiculous possible EHP of a Bastion, yet its uselessness against Helios and Destructors, and the amount of factors that go into play with getting the best HP value, which isn't always just slapping as many Steppenwolf parts as you can. I think it's better to look at this as another layer to the calculations, considerations, where what you're going to be looking for is now depending on not only PS, Dura, volume, and mass as before, but also this whole other system, on top of the projectile versus hit scan properties. We are, after all, approaching this from the opposite perspective of the devs, where we see the values and attempt to figure out how best to utilize it, whereas they're setting those values with the hope of it affecting play in the specific and hopefully measurable manners they're looking for. It seems unlikely that they'd implement such a complex system, for it to once again boil down to only two types mattering. I wouldn't be so hopeful. Here the full list of resistances by the faction. Contrary to popular belief, we'd like to specifically note that the purpose of the changes is not to get rid of the screen armor. Our main task is to ensure that this way of building the car is not an ultimate solution caused by the technical features of the game. The fact that the screens can move the point of explosion away or, thanks to the voids, let the projectile through is normal. Their effectiveness will depend on the weapon of the enemy, the assembled vehicle, and the skills of the players. It won't work the same way in different situations, as it's happening now due to the strict 2-meter limitation. Except the last test invalidated contemporary spaced armor for alpha damage weapons near entirely. Spaced armor is already countered by DPS weapons, be they explosive or ballistic damage. Alpha damage weapons are what is countered by spaced armor. That's a part of the current MG meta. Buff weapons like cannons too much and it could turn into a cannon meta. Piercing coefficient. During the first testing, projectiles would disappear, explode after they had used up all firearm damage. The explosion of the projectile meant that it dealt 100% of its firearm damage to parts. This time we have added new mechanics that allow you to adjust this value. Let's call it the piercing coefficient. First, we will explain how the mechanics work, and then the reasons for its appearance in the game. In the characteristics of the weapon, in the features section, a parameter has appeared that shows the value of the penetration coefficient. By the presence of this parameter, you can understand if the global changes in projectile damage mechanics, removal of the 2-meter limitation, apply to your weapon as well. If you don't see this parameter, then your weapon was not affected. A parameter value of 80% means that the projectile will disappear, explode, after it hits more than 80% of firearm damage. The checking of how much damage the projectile has dealt is done after the damage has been dealt. For example, the projectile has 100 PTs of firearm damage and a piercing coefficient of 80%. Let's consider two situations. The projectile hits a part with 90 PTs. Of durability, the projectile will spend 90% of its damage, and then it will disappear or explode asterisk, because this value is greater than 80% asterisk. The projectile hits a part that has 40 PTs of durability. It destroys it and goes further because it inflicted only 40% of firearm damage. The next part on its way has 100 PTs of durability. The projectile will deal 60 damage to it and disappear or explode, because in total it dealt 100% of damage, which is more than 80%. This way, before disappearing or exploding, the projectile will deal a total from 80% piercing coefficient value to 100% of its firearm damage. Such mechanics are required for greater flexibility in weapon configuration. It allows you to further adjust the minimum amount of damage that a projectile can inflict on parts on its way without affecting the maximum damage to one part. That's an improvement, but these values are not universally distributed. Only cannons, pulse weapons, the summiter, the ripper, flamethrowers, crossbows, the assembler, plasma emitters, the Tempest Whirl, Miller Reaper have some degree of it. And it's seemingly random instead of being projectile speed-based as per my previous suggestion in the previous test server. The turret cannons get 80%, but the fixed cannons get 60% at most? That doesn't make sense. Structural parts. The changes concern only structural parts that increase the durability of the vehicle. The parts of each faction have their own durability to mass ratio. We have improved this ratio by increasing durability. The lighter the faction, the greater the bonus, in percent, it has received. Unless I'm missing something, this is just an increase in TTK since the changes are functionally negligible. Also, we have added resistance to different types of damage, firearm, explosive, thermal, energy, to the parts that increase the durability of the vehicle if they do not have other features, such as lets damage through. The set of resistances depends on the faction. Resistances should be a bonus rather than a fundamental parameter for selecting a part, and should add some uniqueness to each faction and add variety to the process of assembling the vehicle. This is the real problem with this. This was and never will be a good idea. Just doing a quick look over of resistances, they're lopsided in favor of the Steppenwolves. https://imgur.com/a/1skkman. Scavenger armor resistances aren't bad, but the Steppenwolf resistances are just slightly better. Lunatics are your game for countering ballistic damage, but none of their parts will have the HP to use it effectively. Changes in weapon parameters. Durability of many weapons has been increased. This is going to be a mistake. Even if not all weapons get much of a buff, this is just going to lead to battles taking longer because de-gunning takes longer, punishing close-range weapons and builds in general. When I'm using grav stars in PvP, for example, it's on a light build that is not built to stand up to a straight-on fight. Surprise and hit and run is my bread and butter with them. Cannons and turret cannons, blast damage reduced by 10%. This value has been transferred to projectile firearm damage to save the damage to a single part. It'd be better to restore the blast damage and just increase the ballistic damage by 10% instead. Firearm damage for all rocket launchers has been removed, including yokai. Median, damage reduced by 11%, kaiju, burst length reduced from 14 to 12 projectiles. With the new mechanics, the recently increased burst length proved to be redundant. While I could see that being true, that is yet to be proven. Astreus, projectile speed reduced by 20%, an interesting change to say the least. Prosecutor and Executioner, explosion radius reduced by 33%. With the new mechanics, the recently increased radius turned out to be redundant. Perk description will not be updated during this testing. The mechanics of the Prosecutor and Executioner perks work in such a way that the first two pins of the part are pierced by the projectile without taking into account the durability of the pierced parts, and therefore without loss of damage. Then the calculation of the durability of the destroyed parts begins, according to the general principle, like with all standard projectiles. Except you're also reducing the damage of explosions from explosive parts. I'd just leave this as is. Scorpion. Increased value by which damage multiplier drops after a part is pierced. Perk description will not be updated during this testing. Now, after a part is pierced, the damage multiplier is not static as before, but constantly decreases with each pierced part. The size of the multiplier depends on how much damage the Scorpion projectile didn't deal to the previous part. This way, Scorpion will be able to deal more consistent, but at the same time limited damage. It'll be interesting to see just how powerful it is this time since you've not given it any of the penetration this time around. That's fair, but the Astreus might end up too strong after this. The impulse of crossbows is applied at the first contact with the part, not with the last. Not a bad change. Hovers don't receive additional damage when a projectile hits their side projection. Icarus 7. Tonnage increased to 900 kilograms, speed reduced to 90 kilometers per h, reduced flight altitude. First thoughts. This, aside from the side projectile change, actually looks decent. The speed nerf could be more severe through. Another 5 down to 85 would be appreciated. This could change later through radars, RS1 Ruby, RD1 Listener, RD2 Keen, Decor. Radars and Decor can now stop the blast wave. Description hasn't been updated yet. No more than one of the above radars can be mounted on the vehicle. This cannot be allowed to go to the live server. Simply don't enable radars to block explosions again. Having redundant radars is very useful for no small number of builds. My take on turret cannons as a mammoth Mastodon CW main for 6 years with 8,000 hours of playtime. I have tested them thoroughly on the test server, and the issues with these weapons are still prevalent. I feel the other issues with these weapons have been properly addressed by others in the thread already, so I will focus on only one aspect, namely, turret cannons being de-gunned prematurely. The durability numbers of turret cannons look high, but this is deceptive. Due to the sheer size of turret cannons, they are impossible to protect unless you build up so much armor around them that they can only shoot forwards and not to the sides as they were intended to do. This is what we have to do in the current state of the game, or else our weapons get destroyed in seconds. Effectively, we have to play these weapons as we would with weapons that have limited firing angles, e.g. Typhoons or Executioners, meaning that we are limited to using them only on omnidirectional movement types, most commonly spiders or hovers. Sad fact, a build with Destructors and Photon Cabin can destroy an entire mammoth in one click. Let that sink in for a moment. So I've proposed some solutions. Hear me out. Solution #1. Make all turret cannons have directional resistance to damage. Any damage dealt to the front of the cannon should be reduced by 30–50%. This should only apply to the barrel and the frontal portion of the weapon's hitbox. They can still receive damage normally if the damage comes from the sides or rear of the weapon. This will incentivize skillful use of the turret cannons, as players have to carefully consider their positioning in relation to enemies to make use of the directional resistance to damage. By applying these changes, we avoid the following: turret cannons having excessive durability in lower power scores, as opposed to buffing the durability of the entire weapon. They can still be outplayed simply by maneuvering around them so that you deal full damage to the sides or the rear of the weapon. Mounting the cannons in such a way that the gun's rotation is limited will no longer be a necessity in order to not lose your weapon prematurely in seconds. This means that turret cannons are no longer limited to only spiders or builds with omnidirectional movement types, as is the case today. Solution #2. Make all medium and heavy cabins offer resistance to all weapons by default. No mounting limitations, resistance should apply regardless of where the weapon is mounted. Heavy cabins, 30% resistance to all weapons. Medium cabins, 15% resistance to all weapons. Light cabins, 0% resistance to all weapons. Solution #3. Make it so that all turret cannons have damage resistance that scales according to the weight of the craft. E.g., the turret cannons mounted on your build start getting a bonus at 10,000 kilograms and can get up to 30% resistance to all damage if the combined mass of the build they are mounted on exceeds 26,000 kilograms. I'm glad you mentioned Destructors. I've already mentioned in here my bone to pick with Destructors, but everyone except 1 or 2 people make it seem like I'm crazy. I hate fighting those things with my tank because they basically strip my mammoth in 2 charges, and it's connected to an Omamori. The mammoth barely feels like a step up over the fat man. They may as well have the same HP. Reading these current changes seems like I'll be doing less damage, especially to hovers, which are 90% of the builds at my power score.
This is the way. Index pointing up cannons get stripped so quickly it's laughable. With all the new weapons all made specifically to degun, it almost seems as if the devs just want to keep tanky cannon builds down at all cost to ensure hovers stay on top of the food chain and keep dominating throughout all power scores on all game modes. Thumbs down. Attach them to a resistance module and use Grizzly. There is too much resistance in game already. Put them on the train cab, cohort, or Mac if you need more. Destructors have op damage since release and they don't care apparently. That's a separate issue. How long do you think the other weapons last? I use Mastodon in CW. I'm usually just a cab with a cannon or two left because they survive so long. Reduce size a lot and increase durability of cannons. This will buff their durability but make it impossible to use them as armor. Always having a buff to hovers be part of an update SMH. Reducing their speed by a mere 5 km per hour is nothing. When they were buffed by 25 km per hour from 70 km per hour. They were never 70, they were originally 82 years ago, don't know before, then they were nerfed to 75. Then they got buffed to 95. They backtrack on the damage to spaced armor. They buff frame durability by 2.5x as a passive buff to hovers, remove their sideways mounted damage penalty. Remove 5 km per hour but give them more tonnage and make light, medium cabins have less mass impact on acceleration. They really are fucking scared of nerfing them, it's pathetic. I thought we were for buffing cannons, not lobotomize them. My brother in Crossout, the triple executioner can potentially pierce 10 to 6 armor pieces. Will scatter mechanics be affected by ML200 legs? Recoil should have a tight relationship with scatter. Scatter is already in game, most players call it spread. They are just changing how it works, gradually rising from 1+ km per hour. Currently it's on, off between 0 to 1 km per hour. Other commenter on this thread covered spread perks well. No, the bigrams have the perk of closing the reticle faster and omnis of making the reticle growth to be slower. Anyway, passive LMLS make the reticle to grow very little as the max spread would be at 120 km per hour while legs move at 50 max. Support vehicle has been testing Avalanche on MLS and it looks very promising. Why does Lunatic armor have 3 times the resistance as Steppenwolf armor? Just let it be weak as it should be already. They say it's supposedly based off the faction profile. Lunatics have bullet resistance but the rest is garbage, while Steppenwolves have low resistances but way more durable and lower PS parts. It's arguably balanced because all the whales are space station hover users which primarily utilize lunatic buggy parts as armor. With the first changes on the test server, spaced armor got absolutely shredded. So every time the devs make changes they have to indirectly buff hovers to make the changes semi-redundant to keep the whales happy. Not to mention the devs themselves have fully admitted to and even shown on streams that they are avid hover users. They're too afraid to make changes that upset the whales and take away their sense of superiority that makes it fun for them. Structure resistance based on faction sound fun. Can't wait to stack different slaps if armor that doesn't go along just to be protected from all damage. Armor resistances will barely do anything more than add a placebo effect to anyone other than CW min-maxers, and will punish aesthetic and weight-efficient armor, while further convoluting balance and building. This cannot be a good change. Add anti-cheat to console please. Some players already have perfect spread and fire rate at all times lol. Why revert the decor nerf? Going from spaced armor back to goofy snowman-covered vehicles is not a good thing. Sounds pretty interesting thinking face this a hover buff and a cannon nerf hidden in a massive amount of words. So you're telling me the already instant accelerating hovers will now have less weight impact on acceleration? Can't wait to see them zip around corners instantly. Not only that, but there is now increased frame durability so the lightweight frames they use are stronger while weighing less than normal frames. In addition to that, individual hovers don't take as much damage when shooting their offside. That specifically affects cannons because hovers can just rotate and eat the shell if necessary. Explosive modules do less damage, so now hovers can use Gazgan and Thor for less weight without fear of too much damage. Plus lower impulse on explosion. Can't imagine who that changes for. Oh wait, I can, and it means hovers don't get thrown off balance as much from explosion. This seems like 2 steps forward for hovers and 4 steps back for cannons. Probable blue hover nerf is all it needs tbh. They should be more line with everything else. Now when do hardened tracks and heavier get a buff to be competitive at higher PS? That's barely a nerf. Plus they're increasing medium, light cabin acceleration. Which weapons got a durability buff? I really hope Maulers got one. Harvester went up. Mauler have the best ration durability, mass of the game. Great. You nerfed Kaiju by roughly 15% less DMG. Of course you made it silent so that people won't know what is happening. Hovers of course buffed like always. Now hear me out. Make hovers slower but give them more tonnage so hover players don't complain. Then you make a suspicious fusion event including them. People rush and crash the market to get their fused VIITM and then nerf them yet again to a 100% tonnage loss like they did right after 2.0 release. As we noted earlier, we cannot remove the 2-meter limitation from such weapons without significant performance losses. In order to reduce the effectiveness of parts that pass damage relative to such weapons, the limitation has been increased up to 3 meters. I will translate this for you. Hover players are mad that MGS and shotguns will be able to degun them, kill them fast if they put no real armor, heavy. The real reason why it's a strain on server is because after it pass the pass through part and then hits nothing, fly into the map or infinity, it create a lot of calculations. When it pass the pass through and hit armor after even 4 meters, it's not a problem. If they RLY want to reduce the strain but still bring the changes, then they would make it 5/10 meters rule at the same time they put the whole resistance mechanics into parts, and then they are surprised about the strain on the server. Ah yes, because hovers need more benefits. I found that once again you didn't mention avalanche. This weapon's bullet part shares the exact piercing mechanism as the Scorpion before. Now everything remains a mystery again. Just gave it a test. Now avalanche can go straight into the garbage. It loses all the true piercing ability. Good job. It felt like most things were okay, given they could be tweaked more later. I do appreciate the aim time for avalanche being fixed with the movement mechanics change too. I do really question repeating this. Radars, RS1 Ruby, Road 1 Listener, Road 2 Keen, Decor radars and Decor can now stop the blast wave. Description hasn't been updated yet. No more than one of the above radars can be mounted on the vehicle. Auxiliary radars are useful sometimes. I'd also rather not see Decor stop blast waves and used as armor again. I would just skip adding this type of change back in, hoping that I get a few more chances to get on the server and test, so I might add to or alter this later. Top clans use them as armor. Doesn't stop blast doesn't mean they won't stop the ballistic DMG of blast weapons. Garo for example uses 4 of Keen in the back of their breakers. Radars and Decor can now stop blast wave. Looks like they're trying to sell more inflatable weapons pack lol. Any YouTuber going to review these changes? I am guessing Cardboard Ninja will. I like this. This is the way. Dracos, firebugs, and remedies seem to be at a severe disadvantage. Will the new changes help with the disadvantages that fire dogs have currently in the game? I am definitely for those changes however. I think cannons are already weak and can be striped fast AF. They should get more resists too or some decent HP buff. Or increase its DMG to be able to strip MGS. So yeah guys, this whole situation is pretty crazy. I would kinda agree, and just to stop this whole update in my opinion, but yeah, this is Inverter Amy. Until then, leave me the hell alone.